John Miller always thought of the lake cabin as more than just a house. It was a piece of his family's history, a place tied to memories that stretched across generations. His grandparents had purchased the land decades ago, back when the lakeside community was nothing more than a scattering of small wooden cottages tucked between tall pines and quiet water. They had built the cabin with their own hands, using timber cut from nearby trees and stone gathered from the shoreline. Over time, the little house grew into a cherished retreat where birthdays, summer vacations, and even quiet winter holidays were celebrated. For John, the cabin represented peace. During his work in the busy city, surrounded by noise and constant responsibility, he often dreamed of the calm mornings by the lake. There was something about the way the mist rose off the water at dawn, softening the world into a gentle gray-blue painting that filled him with a sense of renewal. He remembered waking up as a boy, rubbing sleep from his eyes and running barefoot down the wooden steps to the dock, where his grandfather would already be waiting with 2 fishing rods. Those early days planted a deep love for the cabin in his heart, one that never left him as he grew older. When he inherited the cabin, John promised himself he would preserve it exactly as his family had known it. He kept the stone fireplace intact, polished the wooden beams, and even maintained the original window frames that creaked during strong winds. Neighbors often smiled when they saw him carrying fresh supplies of paint or hauling logs for the fire pit. Unlike some who treated their cabins as mere vacation spots, John treated his as sacred ground. The community around the lake was a quiet one. Families came and went, but everyone seemed bound together by the simple love of nature and the desire to keep the lake unspoiled. Summer evenings were often spent with neighbors sitting by the shore, roasting marshmallows and telling stories under the stars. John valued this sense of togetherness. He often lent a hand to repair someone's boat, clear a path, or shovel snow from a driveway in winter. He felt that the cabin was not only his home, but also part of a larger family of people who shared the same lake. Yet over the years, subtle changes began to appear. What had once been an informal, friendly community grew more structured as newer residents moved in. Some wanted rules, order, and more control over the shared spaces. Eventually, a homeowners association, or HOA, was formed. At first, John didn't think much about it. The meetings were casual, the rules were light, and most of the long-term residents didn't mind. The idea was to take care of common areas like the entrance road, the boat docks, and the small playground near the shoreline. John dutifully paid the small dues requested, usually just enough to cover maintenance costs. He believed in fairness and didn't see any harm in helping to keep the community clean and safe. However, he also noticed that over time the HOA began to change. New board members with ambitious ideas started enforcing stricter rules. Signs went up warning about parking. Notices were left on doors about lawn height and paint colors. The easygoing spirit of the lake community slowly began to fade. Even so, John kept to himself. His cabin remained in perfect condition, always neat and cared for, so he never thought he would run into trouble. Whenever he looked at the old wooden porch swing or the wind chime his grandmother had hung decades ago, he felt a comfort that no new rules could take away. The cabin was his anchor, a place where he could bring his children to teach them how to fish, just as his grandfather had once taught him. On quiet evenings, John would sit by the fire pit outside, listening to the crackle of flames while gazing across the water. He thought about how his family had worked hard to protect the cabin. His parents had weathered storms, repaired flood damage, sacrificed vacations elsewhere so that money could go toward keeping the property safe. Every stone and beam carried their devotion. For John, it wasn't just property. It was a story, a living connection between past, present, and future. He took pride in watching his own children fall in love with the cabin. His son loved the thrill of catching his first fish from the dock, while his daughter enjoyed curling up with a book on the porch swing, the lake breeze gently turning the pages. His wife cherished the mornings when sunlight streamed through the trees, painting golden patterns across the wooden floors. For them, the cabin wasn't just a getaway, it was a second home, a place where family bonds deepened. When friends visited, John always gave them a tour, proudly showing the carved initials of his grandparents, still etched into the stone fireplace and the shelf filled with old photographs. Each photo told a story: snowy winters when the family braved icy roads to gather for Christmas, summers filled with boating and laughter, and autumn evenings where the air smelled of pine and wood smoke. Guests often commented that the cabin felt alive, as if it held every memory within its walls. Despite the changes in the community, John remained hopeful that the spirit of the lake would endure. He believed that as long as people respected each other and treasured the land, the lake would continue to be a source of peace for generations. Whenever he locked the cabin door at the end of a weekend, he did so with gratitude, knowing he would return again soon to the place that always restored him. For John, the cabin was never about luxury or status. It was simple wooden floors that creaked, windows that rattled in the wind, and a roof that needed repairing every few years. But in that simplicity lay its beauty. It was a reminder of what truly mattered: family, memories, and the quiet strength of a place built with love. And so, as he looked out one evening over the still water, with the sky painted in shades of orange and pink, John felt certain that nothing could take away what the cabin meant to him. It was more than a building. It was his family's heart, standing strong by the lakeside. He had no way of knowing, as the fire crackled beside him, that forces beyond his control would soon test just how strong that heart could remain. One warm summer afternoon, John drove up the winding road that led to his family's lake cabin. The tall trees formed a canopy overhead, and the sunlight danced across his windshield. As he neared the driveway, he slowed the car, enjoying the familiar sight of pine needles carpeting the ground and the calm shimmer of the water peeking through the branches. For him, arriving at the cabin was always a moment of peace, like stepping into another world where time moved slower and life's pressures felt far away. But this time, something felt different. As he pulled up, his eyes caught a bright piece of paper fluttering in the breeze. It was taped right to the cabin's front door. John frowned, climbed out of the car, and approached with curiosity. The closer he got, the more he realized it wasn't a friendly note from a neighbor or a delivery service. It was an official-looking notice, typed in bold letters. The message stunned him. It claimed that he owed thousands of dollars in unpaid HOA fees. The notice warned that if he did not pay immediately, the association would take further action. John blinked at the paper, reading it again to be sure. Unpaid fees? That couldn't be right. He always paid his dues on time. He even kept a small folder at home with every receipt neatly filed away, proof that he never missed a payment. He stepped back, the paper still in his hand, and felt a wave of confusion wash over him. Who had put this notice here? Why would they accuse him of something he knew wasn't true? The cabin looked so peaceful, its weathered wood glowing in the afternoon sun. Yet the sharp words on the notice made it feel like a stranger. That evening, he sat by the fireplace inside the cabin and carefully reread the notice. He thought back to the past years, how each spring he mailed in the dues, how the small checks were always cashed, and how he had never once been contacted about a late payment. He felt certain that some mistake had been made. Perhaps it was just a clerical error, something that could be fixed with a simple phone call. The next morning, he drove into town and visited the HOA office. The building was small, tucked between a grocery store and a hardware shop. Inside, the air smelled of freshly printed paper and coffee. John approached the front desk and explained the situation to the woman working there. He calmly told her that he had received a notice claiming unpaid dues, but that he had proof of payment. The woman gave him a polite but distant smile. If you've got proof, you can mail it to our board. But as far as our records show, you're behind. John pulled out copies of his receipts right there, hoping to clear things up quickly. He slid them across the counter and explained each payment. The woman glanced at them but didn't seem interested. She simply repeated that the board would review it. Feeling unsettled, John left the office. Days later, he received another letter, this one even sterner. It said that his delinquent balance remained unpaid and penalties were being added. The numbers on the page shocked him. They were climbing higher with each letter. He called the number listed, hoping to speak directly with someone who could listen. But each time he was told the same thing. The records showed he hadn't paid. Weeks passed and the situation grew heavier. Instead of enjoying the cabin, as he always had, John now found himself checking the mailbox nervously. bracing for another notice. His family noticed his worry. His wife asked why he looked distracted, and his children wondered why he spent so much time on the phone. John tried to reassure them that it was only a mix-up, but deep down he began to feel uneasy. The cabin, once a place of joy, began to carry a shadow. On one visit, he found another notice pinned to the door, but this one was even more alarming. It stated that the HOA was considering property action if the debt was not resolved. The words were vague but threatening. He stood there in the doorway, staring at the notice, feeling a chill run through him even though the summer air was warm. John knew he couldn't ignore this any longer. He gathered all of his paperwork, bank statements, receipts, and even copies of old letters from the HOA thanking him for timely payments. He sent everything in a detailed package to the board, explaining that the debt was not real and asking them to correct their mistake. He thought that, once they saw the evidence, the matter would finally end. But instead of a resolution, another shock awaited him. One afternoon, as he returned to the cabin for a weekend with his family, he saw something he would never forget. Construction equipment sat near his driveway. Men in hard hats were gathered around, and part of the cabin's porch had already been damaged. His heart raced as he parked the car and hurried toward them. "What's going on here?" he demanded. One of the workers explained in a calm but firm voice that the HOA had ordered demolition of the property due to unpaid fees. John couldn't believe what he was hearing. His family's cabin, was being torn apart over a debt that didn't even exist. He tried to reason with them, telling them it was a mistake, but the workers only shrugged. They were following orders. John felt powerless as he watched. He thought of his children's laughter echoing in the cabin, of his grandfather teaching him how to fish, of all the memories stored in those walls. To see it reduced to rubble before his eyes filled him with a mix of sorrow and disbelief. How could anyone have the authority to do this without even listening to him? As the sun set that evening, John stood by the lake, his cabin behind him, half destroyed. He felt a deep ache in his chest, not just for the building, but for the injustice of it all. He had done everything right, yet he was being treated as though he were careless. The lake, usually so calming, seemed to mirror his turmoil, its surface rippling with the wind. At that moment, John knew that this was no longer just about a cabin. This was about standing up for what was right. His family's home had been wrongfully taken from them, and he would not let the matter rest. What he didn't realize was that the strength of his family and the paths they had chosen in life would soon turn the tables in ways the HOA could never have imagined. John could not sleep that night after watching the cabin he loved so deeply being torn apart. The crack of wood splintering, the heavy sound of machines breaking into the porch, and the sight of dust rising into the air stayed in his mind like a haunting echo. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling of his city home, replaying every detail. It wasn't just a loss of property, it felt like an attack on everything his family had built, preserved and cherished for generations. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became this wasn't simply a mistake. This was something larger. The HOA had ignored his receipts, refused his calls, and dismissed his evidence. And then, without so much as a fair hearing, they moved directly to demolition. It was reckless, unfair, and deeply unjust. The more John reflected, the stronger his resolve grew. He knew he could not fight this alone, but he also knew he wasn't alone at all. John's family was unique. His brother Michael had worked for years as an FBI agent, known for his sharp investigative skills. His sister, Emily, was with Homeland Security, someone who specialized in uncovering fraud and irregularities. And John himself had spent years as a federal investigator, handling cases where accuracy and evidence made all the difference. Together, they were a family trained to uncover the truth, equipped with the skills to confront wrongdoing, and unwilling to stand by while injustice triumphed. The next weekend, John called a family meeting at his home. Around the dining table, the air felt heavy with emotion. He explained everything: the notices, the ignored evidence, and the shocking demolition. His wife sat quietly, her face full of worry. His children, too young to fully grasp the legalities, understood only that their beloved cabin had been destroyed. When John finished, Silence filled the room. Then Michael leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "This isn't just about you, John. If they did this to you, they might be doing it to others. This smells like fraud." Emily nodded. "The paperwork you showed us, their letters, don't line up with your records. If they ignored clear proof of payment, that's more than a mistake. That's intentional." Hearing their words gave John strength. He wasn't just a victim. He was now part of a mission to uncover the truth. They began by gathering everything they could. John laid out his receipts, bank statements, and copies of the threatening notices. Emily scrutinized every line, highlighting inconsistencies. For example, the account numbers listed on the delinquent balance didn't match any of John's official statements. The totals seemed oddly inflated, with fees and penalties that weren't explained. Meanwhile, Michael started digging into public records. He discovered that the HOA had recently filed similar claims against other homeowners in the community. Several cabins had been sold at suspiciously low prices, after owners were told they owed unpaid fees. The pattern was troubling. It suggested that the HOA might be manufacturing debt to pressure families into giving up their properties the deeper they looked. The more disturbing the picture became. Permits for demolition appeared rushed, with signatures that looked questionable. Financial records showed large sums of money moving in and out of the HOA's accounts. There's no clear explanation of where it went. It became evident that this was not just about John's cabin. It was a web of dishonesty that stretched across the community. John's heart ached as he realized. How many neighbors might have suffered in silence? He remembered the older couple who once lived 2 cabins down, who suddenly sold their place after an issue with fees. He thought of the family with 3 children who left after receiving repeated notices. At the time, it had seemed like normal turnover. Now he saw it in a new light. It was possible that they, too, had been pushed out unfairly. As the investigation grew, the family divided tasks. Emily reached out to local county offices to request permit copies and financial filings. Michael interviewed a few former residents, gently asking why they had left. Some were hesitant to talk at first, but when they realized someone was finally listening, stories poured out. They described feeling harassed, intimidated, and powerless against the HOA's board. John worked on building a timeline, piecing together events from the first notice he received to the day of demolition. He wrote everything down in clear detail, adding photographs, letters, and witness accounts. He knew from his own career that a strong timeline could make or break a case. What struck them most was how the HOA relied on the assumption that no one would fight. Most families didn't have the time, resources, or knowledge to challenge what looked like official documents. Many simply gave up. But John's family was different. They had the training, the determination, and most importantly, the truth on their side. One evening, as the family sat surrounded by stacks of papers and files, John looked around the room and felt a surge of gratitude. His siblings weren't just helping him, they were fighting for justice. He realized that while the cabin had been destroyed, the spirit of what it stood for was still alive. Family unity, resilience, and the courage to stand up against wrong. The next step was clear. They would prepare a case strong enough to bring before the proper authorities. This meant organizing every piece of evidence into a form that prosecutors and judges could easily follow. It meant being patient, careful, precise. But it also meant something else. John had to face the emotional weight of returning to the lake. Together with Michael and Emily, he visited the site where the cabin once stood. The land looked bare and wounded, the debris mostly cleared away. Only a few pieces of wood and stone remained. Like fragments of a memory, standing there, John felt anger, but also determination. "They thought they could erase this," he said quietly. "But what they didn't know is that this isn't just a cabin. It's a legacy, and we're not going to let them get away with it."
Out.
Michael placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll get them, John. Step by step." Emily added softly, "And we'll do it the right way. By the book. That's how we win." As the sun dipped below the trees, casting golden light across the lake, the 3 siblings stood together, united not just by blood, but by purpose. They knew the road ahead would not be easy. Powerful people often hid behind layers of paperwork and procedure. But they also knew that truth, once uncovered, had a power that could not be denied. Back at John's home, the investigation continued late into the night. They uncovered more stories, more irregularities, and more evidence that the HOA board had abused its power. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. What began as a personal tragedy was now becoming something larger. A fight to protect not only John's family, but every family who had been wronged. And while the cabin itself was gone, the mission to restore justice had only just begun. With all the evidence collected, John and his family realized it was time to take decisive action. They had proof that the HOA had acted unfairly, ignored payments, and demolished his cabin without proper justification. But uncovering the truth was only the first step. Now, they had to bring it into the hands of those who could enforce the law and ensure justice. John's brother Michael contacted his colleagues at the FBI, explaining the situation carefully. He presented the evidence they had gathered, from the suspicious financial records to the testimonies of former residents. Michael's experience allowed him to frame the case in a way that emphasized patterns of fraud and abuse of authority, rather than just a personal dispute. The FBI showed interest immediately. Recognizing that this was more than a local issue, it was a possible criminal pattern affecting multiple families. Emily, meanwhile, contacted the local district attorney's office. She walked the staff through the timeline, detailing every notice, every ignored payment, and the final demolition. With her background in federal investigation, she highlighted how the HOA had relied on misleading paperwork to intimidate residents and seize property. The DA's office agreed to look into the matter, promising to review all documents and verify the legitimacy of the HOA's actions. John prepared for meetings, feeling both nervous and determined. He knew that presenting evidence to professionals who were used to handling high-profile cases was different from discussing it with neighbors or the HOA. He organized each file, created clear summaries, and made sure every photograph and document was easy to understand. Nothing could be left ambiguous. Precision was key as the investigation moved forward. The family decided to reach out to other residents who had faced similar issues. Some had moved away quietly, feeling powerless against the HOA's authority. Others had sold their cabins under duress. John and his siblings contacted these families, asking for their stories, copies of letters, and any financial records they could provide. Slowly, a larger picture emerged. This was not an isolated incident, but part of a systematic pattern. The more they uncovered, the more serious the situation seemed. Some HOA board members had signed demolition permits for properties that had no outstanding debts. Others had falsified meeting notes to make it appear as if homeowners had been warned repeatedly. Large sums of money had been transferred through accounts with little explanation. It was clear the HOA had abused its power, and the scale of their wrongdoing was greater than John had imagined. Armed with this growing body of evidence, the family began preparing for court. They knew that legal battles were long, stressful, and sometimes unpredictable, but they also knew that truth and preparation were on their side. Michael and Emily guided John through each step, explaining how the legal system worked and what to expect. Together, they built a strategy. First, show clear evidence of wrongdoing. Second, demonstrate the pattern affecting multiple homeowners. And third, demand accountability and restitution. The day of the first hearing arrived, and John felt a mixture of anxiety and hope. Walking into the courthouse, he saw the HOA board members seated across the room, looking composed and confident. But John wasn't alone. His family was beside him, their presence giving him strength. He carried the folders of evidence, photographs, and statements that had taken months to collect, ready to lay the truth bare. The proceedings began with statements from the HOA, which insisted that their actions were legal and justified. They claimed that unpaid fees were accurately recorded and that demolition had followed proper procedure. But as John and his family presented their evidence, cracks in the HOA's story quickly appeared. Receipts showing timely payments, emails confirming correspondence that the HOA denied, and testimonies from neighbors contradicted the board's claims. The judge listened carefully as John spoke, his voice steady, despite the emotions churning inside him. He described the memories tied to the cabin, the effort his family had put into preserving it, and the shock of seeing it destroyed over a false accusation. While the story was personal, the evidence showed a clear pattern. The HOA had acted unfairly and with disregard for the law. As the trial progressed, other families came forward to testify. They described harassment, threats, and coercion by the HOA. One elderly couple recounted how they had been forced to sell their cabin after being falsely accused of unpaid fees, while another family explained that they had moved away because they feared losing their property. Each story reinforced the evidence, showing that this was not a single incident, but a consistent abuse of power. The courtroom atmosphere shifted. What had started as a local dispute over fees became a case about accountability, fairness, and the responsibility of those in positions of authority. The HOA board members, once confident, began to look uneasy as the evidence mounted. Photographs, letters, and official records left little room for them to deny their actions. During cross-examination, Michael and Emily helped highlight inconsistencies in the HOA's records. Numbers didn't match, dates were altered, and signatures were questionable. Each revelation chipped away at the credibility of the board members, and the judge took careful notes. Clearly concerned about the deliberate nature of the actions, John's family also emphasized the emotional impact of the demolition. It wasn't just a building that had been destroyed. It was a place of memories, tradition, and family history. The testimony painted a picture of loss, fear, and injustice, making the case relatable not only to the law, but also to the human sense of fairness. Weeks passed as the hearings continued, but John and his family remained patient. They knew that persistence, evidence, and clarity were more powerful than anger or emotion. Slowly, the case began to gain attention. Local news outlets picked up the story, reporting on the unfair practices of the HOA and the courage of John's family in standing up against them. Neighbors began to speak out, some sharing their own experiences, others offering support. Finally, after months of investigation and hearings, the court reached a decision. The judge ruled in favor of John and the other homeowners who had been affected. The HOA board members were held accountable for their actions. Financial penalties were imposed, and restitution was ordered to cover damages for demolished or forcibly sold properties. More importantly, the court emphasized that HOA boards could not act with impunity, that homeowners had the right to due process, and that deliberate abuse of authority would not be tolerated. John felt a wave of relief and satisfaction. The cabin was gone, but justice had been served. His family's efforts had protected other homeowners, exposed wrongdoing, and reaffirmed the importance of fairness in the community. The case had transformed from a personal tragedy into a larger mission of accountability and integrity. In the weeks following the ruling, John and his family worked to help the affected families rebuild their lives. Some cabins were restored, others sold fairly, and support networks were established to ensure that no one would be forced out unfairly in the future. The lake community, once fearful and uncertain, began to heal. Its residents emboldened by the courage and dedication of John's family. Standing by the water one evening, John reflected on the journey. The destruction of the cabin had felt like the end of everything, and it had sparked a fight for truth and justice that touched many lives. He realized that while the physical building was gone, its spirit remained. The lake, the trees, and the memories lived on, stronger now because they had survived adversity. John knew that justice had been restored, but he also knew the experience had changed him. The fight had taught patience, resilience, and the power of family unity. It had shown that even in the face of unfairness, courage and careful action could turn the tide. And while the cabin was no longer standing, the legacy of what it represented, the love, memories, and determination of a family, would endure forever. After the court ruling, John felt a sense of relief that he hadn't known in months. The fight had been long, exhausting, and emotionally draining, but it had also been transformative. The unfair demolition of his beloved cabin had sparked a series of events that not only brought justice to his family, but also protected the entire lakeside community. Yet even as he celebrated the victory, he understood that the journey wasn't over. The cabin might have been gone, but the spirit it represented, the heart of his family, and their legacy needed to be rebuilt, stronger than ever. The first step was dealing with the aftermath of the demolition. John and his family returned to the property to survey the damage thoroughly. The site was a mixture of broken timber, splintered beams, and scattered belongings. Every corner of the land held reminders of what had been lost. The stone fireplace now reduced to rubble. The porch where his children had swung on summer evenings, lying in broken pieces. And the garden his grandmother had planted decades ago, now overgrown and trampled. The sight was painful, but John saw more than destruction. He saw an opportunity to create something new, a chance to honor the past while building for the future with the support of his siblings. John began planning the rebuilding process. They met with architects and builders who specialized in lake cabins, discussing designs that would preserve the spirit of the original structure while incorporating modern safety features and durability. The plan was not to replicate the cabin exactly, but to create a home that could withstand the test of time and symbolize resilience. They wanted every beam, every corner, to reflect the strength and unity of their family. Meanwhile, the financial restitution awarded by the court allowed them to cover most of the rebuilding costs. The HOA's penalties and fines helped pay for materials, labor, and permits, and John made sure that every dollar went directly into restoring the property. As construction began, the family worked together, not only overseeing the builders, but also contributing wherever they could. John carried stones for the new foundation. His children helped plant young trees along the shoreline, and his wife supervised the garden, planting flowers reminiscent of the ones that had grown decades earlier. But rebuilding the cabin was not only a physical task, it was also emotional. Every day brought memories of what had been lost, moments of sadness intertwined with determination. Yet in those moments, John realized that the fight had strengthened his family's bonds. His children had learned lessons in resilience, courage, and justice, far beyond any classroom. They had witnessed the importance of standing up for what is right, of protecting not only their own family, but also their neighbors, and of approaching challenges with patience and intelligence. Word of the court victory and the family's rebuilding efforts spread throughout the community. Neighbors who had once felt powerless came to support John, bringing meals, offering labor, or simply visiting to share encouragement. Families who had faced similar harassment from the HOA felt inspired to speak up, realizing that collective effort could make a difference. The community began to heal, no longer overshadowed by fear and intimidation. People discussed forming a new association, one that would be transparent, fair, and accountable, ensuring that no homeowner would face what John and others had endured. As the cabin took shape, it became a symbol, not just a home, but a testament to perseverance. Each log and stone was placed with intention, each corner reflecting the care and love that had always defined the Miller family. The new cabin honored the past while embracing the future. The family incorporated some of the old cabin's elements. The stone fireplace was rebuilt using some of the original stones. The old window frames were restored and installed, and a commemorative plaque was placed in the garden to honor the history of the property. These touches preserve the connection to the past. While celebrating a new beginning, life slowly returned to normal at the lake. Summers once again became filled with laughter, fishing trips, and quiet mornings by the water. John watched his children run along the dock, feeling the familiar joy that had first drawn him to the cabin years ago. His wife prepared breakfast on the new porch while the sun rose, painting the water with warm hues. Though the cabin had been destroyed once, the new home carried the same sense of peace. Strengthened by the lessons of the past, John also took time to reflect on the wider impact of the ordeal. The court ruling and the public attention it garnered had changed how the community viewed homeowners' rights. The story of the demolished cabin became a reference point in local discussions about accountability and fairness. People no longer accepted arbitrary decisions or threats without questioning them, and many began advocating for transparent procedures in all neighborhood associations. John realized that the fight, while painful, created positive change far beyond his own family. The Millers continued to use their experience as a teaching moment. John's children learned the importance of responsibility, vigilance, and community support. They understood that standing up for themselves and others required courage, preparation, and persistence. Michael and Emily also shared their knowledge, helping neighbors navigate the new association rules and ensuring that future conflicts would be handled fairly. The family's collective experience became a source of guidance, inspiring others to act when injustice appeared. As the years passed, the cabin stood not only as a home but as a symbol of resilience. The community around the lake flourished, guided by the principles of fairness and transparency that John and his family had helped establish. The rebuilt cabin, stronger and more beautiful than before, reminded everyone that even in the face of unfairness, determination, unity, and truth could prevail. John often sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset reflect on the water. He thought about the journey they had taken from the initial shock of the demolition to the long months of investigation, court battles, and rebuilding. It had been exhausting, but it had also been transformative. The cabin, though physically new, carried the spirit of the original, a legacy of family, love, and perseverance. He understood now that the loss of the cabin had been a turning point. It had shown the importance of standing up for what was right, of using one's knowledge and skills to fight injustice, and of supporting those who could not defend themselves. More than that, it had proven that family unity, patience, and careful planning could overcome even the most unexpected challenges. In the end, John realized that a home is not just wood and stone. It is the memories created, the lessons learned, and the bonds strengthened through shared experiences. The cabin had survived not in its original form, but in the hearts and actions of those who loved it. And through their courage and dedication, the Miller family had ensured that its story would never be forgotten, even as new seasons came and went. Bringing snow in winter and sunlight in summer, the cabin remained a place of comfort, joy, and reflection. It was a reminder that challenges could be met, that injustice could be confronted, and that perseverance, unity, and integrity could restore what had been threatened. John often smiled as he watched his children play by the lake, knowing that the lessons learned from the ordeal would carry forward, guiding not only their family but the entire community for generations to come. The rebuilt cabin became a living story, a story of struggle, of courage, and of triumph. It was a story that would inspire neighbors, friends, and even strangers who heard of the ordeal. And for John, Emily, and Michael, it was proof that no obstacle, no matter how large, could break the bonds of family or destroy the values they cherished. The fight for justice had ended, but the lessons it taught and the legacy it left would last forever.